Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of MedHead. And as you know, I am done with my first semester of medical school. I've been excited to make this video for a while now because you always hear that the first semester of medical school is really where it hits you the hardest. It's where you get the most surprises, good and bad, and kind of where you get to get your feet wet. And I'm going to give you guys my honest thoughts on what I thought and still think about medical school. And by the end of this video, you should be able to tell whether or not I think medical school is worth it. And I'll categorize most of the things I tell you guys as an up or down. And without further ado, let's get started on the first day. If you guys saw my first day video, I was pretty nervous that day. I didn't have really any expectations. I didn't know necessarily what to expect, but the expectations I had were high as far as the rigor and how much work they were going to throw at us. Before going to medical school, I struggled with the idea that I didn't belong there, which is not an abnormal thing to kind of think of as a matriculating med student. Imposter syndrome is a real thing. And the first day we were eased in, I'm not gonna lie. If you guys saw in the video, we didn't do a lot. We actually didn't even have a actual science class that day. It was very much just easing us in, getting us acclimated. And I'm very thankful for that day. And I was still that wide-eyed med student by the end of the day because I had not really been hit yet. And lo and behold, about 2 or 3 days later, we started our science classes, and it was just like a wave of information that you felt like every time you got up to breathe from, there was more. And it's not necessarily that the information was difficult. It was just so much. I mean, I pretty much found myself almost having to trust myself that I had seen the material enough to move on to more, because in college I used to not like to move on to new material until I was sure I had something down pat. I went over it a few times, made sure I sat there, let it kind of marinate in my mind, and then I would move on. In medical school, I unfortunately don't have the leisure of having the time to spend as much time on a topic before I'm comfortable moving on, and it was just kind of uncomfortable for me because I had been doing that for a while now, kind of, making sure I had everything down. And that was the biggest shock for me, kind of just, you have to move on. You can't stay here. I kind of panicked with that, and thankfully I kind of settled down at times. As you guys know, obviously I use Anki a lot, so that helps me kind of retain information, but that is just something that I will never get over, just the amount of material. I don't consider myself a genius by any sorts. And so I think anyone who is like an average person who likes to learn like me and is not a genius by any sorts, that's not a normal amount of information for said person. And I have to always tell myself, this is a lot of information. This is not college. You're not supposed to think that it's not a lot. You can't keep comparing it to college. It's way more material. So I have come to terms with that to some sort. We pick up with modules, the organ-based system, next semester starting that. And so hopefully, as far as material and amount wise, I am okay with it being a lot and kind of still in reality with that. So I don't expect myself to stretch too far. But kind of jumping off of that, a big up for me was what I'm learning. I mean, this is the first time where almost every single thing I'm learning has some type of relevance to me, whether it's gonna help me better as a doctor as far as patient relationships, or as a doctor in making diagnoses or coming up with treatment plans. I mean, it feels really great to kind of know that, okay, this stuff is really going to have an impact on my career and someone's life one day. And at the same time that it makes it scary. There are times you're doing Anki and it feels so monotonous and you're just wondering where you're going with it, especially with the pandemic and being inside all the time in the same spot. It's just really hard to kind of be in perspective all the time. At times I wake up and I'm like, oh my gosh, the cards you're learning, like knowing the symptoms of Staph aureus and Streptococcus pyogenes, I mean, these are not random flashcards in themselves. I mean, these are things that could potentially be the difference maker in someone's health one day. So that aspect of what I'm going through, it's really easy for me to pull myself back into a motivational headspace, whereas in college it was kind of hard for me to find motivation, especially in certain things that I didn't find particularly specific to what I wanted to do in medicine. But now I'm in medical school, everything I am able to kind of pull myself back into perspective, because one way or another it's supposed to help me be a better physician. And so that is something I really like about medical school. And even now talking about it even more so, I'm like, wow, you are lucky because you get to do what you have been wanting to do for a long time, and you can say that you feel rewarded even studying these things. I mean, it's something that is a privilege. Sometimes it feels like it's not a privilege, and it could be hard and you really just want to go to sleep. And that is the nature of the beast. I think with anything that you're passionate about, especially if it's something that takes a lot of time, it's going to wear on you, and sometimes you're going to doubt yourself. But what can always pull you through is what you're doing is what you love. And that's something I really enjoy about the material that we're learning. So even though it is a lot, I am easily able to kind of motivate myself, whereas in college, it was kind of like I had to kind of convince myself way more in college that what I was learning was enjoyable. So I love that part about med school. And because things are just so much more important to me, I have found myself learning just to learn. I mean, you learn for the grade, obviously, in college a lot of the time. It was getting that high GPA, you're trying to get into med school, you're learning to the test, and it's what's rewarded. I mean, it's not a bad thing to do, but it wasn't the most enjoyable thing to do. Whereas in med school, it's enjoyable in some aspects for me to literally learn just to learn for the sake of having that knowledge, especially since we're starting preceptorships next semester and I will be shadowing a cardiologist. Some of those Anki cards, those cardio Anki cards, the perspective of actually this is mattering, this is going to matter, made me spend more time on those cardio Anki cards and appreciate them way more, because I am able to see the perspective they're going to be in very soon in January when I do my preceptorship, and even just in my career as a whole. But it kind of ties back into I want to be the best physician that I can be for my patients. And I think that's something that kind of exceeded my expectations. I didn't expect to kind of find material as rewarding to learn just because of the inherent complications of the material itself. I kind of always used to find material rewarding to learn because, I'm gonna get a good grade on this test because I learned it, not just because it's an extra tool in my toolbox for me to use later. So that's really exciting part that exceeded my expectations. Another thing that exceeded my expectations were how helpful my classmates would be. You might hear people say that there are gunners everywhere in med school, and that is not a false statement. You're gonna find people like that in real life, anywhere you go. Not everything's gonna be butterflies and cupcakes, not everything's gonna be nice. However, I was very pleasantly overwhelmed by how nice and collaborative my class was. And you could say that I should have kind of expected it, because that's part of the reason why I chose McGovern, because of how much more collaborative their atmosphere felt than other schools. But it was even exceeding my expectations. People help each other in the ways of making study guides, doing study groups over WebEx. Quite literally, the class group chat that I'm a part of has been so helpful in helping me navigate throughout this whole semester and making sure I don't miss certain dates and things like that. It's just been super helpful. But for the most part, our class has been really reliable. People that we can kind of complain to, let off some heat, and then also study with, gain some insight from. And the class is super diverse. We have lots of moms, dads, engineers. Somebody's family owns a whole honey farm. It made me feel boring to find out how diverse our class is, but I love a lot of the members here, and I cannot wait until we are able to safely meet and kind of form more normal med school bonds rather than through the group chat. One thing that's kind of been hard for this semester is that because we are in the middle of a pandemic, we haven't had the opportunity to do a lot of in-person things. And while that is hard, the school has done a really good job at doing what they can do to make sure that we are not falling behind the normal curriculum on any other given year. A big question I get is med school hard? Yes. It's very hard. It's probably one of the most mentally challenging things I've ever done, maybe besides drum corps. If you guys don't know what drum corps is, ignore me. I wasn't necessarily the most healthy before medical school, but being in medical school has taken a toll sometimes on my health, as far as my mental health, sleeping, eating, just different types of things, exercising. I mean, I cannot think of a part of my life that med school has not changed or touched or impacted. It is a full investment. You have to show up every day, do your job, and if you don't decide to show up one day, it piles on to the next, and it is just not a fun experience if you let it pile up. It's going to test you. It is a whirlwind, a roller coaster, and it's something that probably was a little harder because of the pandemic. I probably didn't have that normal social support as much as previous classes. The only thing reining me back in, like I've said before, is the passion. The original reason I'm here is to become a great physician. And so med school is hard. As far as the tests go, at least I learned to lower my standards for between college and med school. I remember getting, and you guys are going to roll your eyes. Everyone I tell this to rolls their eyes. But 90s made me uncomfortable. 91s, 92s, 93s. Y'all are going to hate me. Okay, this is very relative for me and what I kind of expected myself to do. 90s made me uncomfortable. And in med school, a 90 will make me ecstatic. My standards have shifted. Med school exams are harder, but not necessarily because the questions they're asking are harder, but because of the amount of material there is to hold together and learn. It seems near impossible to do. All that to say, I have made some good friends in med school. I have had some highs and lows. I have pushed myself past limits that I have not thought possible. I have been unhealthy. I have been healthy. It's just been such a roller coaster. While everything did not happen perfectly the first semester, it went really well and I wouldn't change anything about it. I feel myself having grown a lot even just in one semester, and I still have a lot more to do. There's a lot more to go. We have 7 more semesters to go before we have that MD, so we have a lot more to do. But with that first semester behind me, I don't mind giving myself a pat on the back. I'm super excited to be done with the first semester, and I'm actually really intrigued to begin our organ system modules because they're very different than what we did this first semester. That will be a journey, and I can't wait to take you guys with me on that. But until then, I'm actually about to, in 30 minutes, go get my first dose of the COVID vaccine, and I'm really excited about that. But I will see you guys on the very next MedHead.